Democrats will do pretty much anything these days to just waste our tax dollars. And yes, some Republicans are right on board with them. There's a handful of Republicans in the House and Senate, though, that are fighting back against this wasteful spending. And particularly, I'm discussing the cash we're sending to Ukraine. If you recall, if you watched Friday's show, I think we added it up. We're close to 60 billion. I could be off a couple billion here or there. But when you're talking billions, does it matter? It's our money. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul is one of the only ones right now putting a stop to the madness, denying Congress this vote they need to advance $40 billion more in aid for Ukraine. Here's what Paul had to say about it over the weekend.
The oath of office is to the U.S. Constitution, not to any foreign nation. And no matter how sympathetic the cause, my oath of office is to the national security of the United States of America. We cannot save Ukraine by dooming the U.S. economy.
What a great statement. We can't save Ukraine by dooming the U.S. economy. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz here now to weigh in on what I'll call the slush fund that Democrats and, yes, some Republicans are creating for Ukraine. But, Matt, before I get to that, we just had on a gentleman. We were discussing what happened over the weekend in Buffalo, New York, and then in Orange County, California at the church. And I just wanted to address that with you and discuss, of course, what's been happening in our nation's capital now with the debate, once again, over gun control, because for some reason the left still can't figure out that guns don't kill people, people kill people. Your thoughts on what happened?
Well, if Democrats were right, if gun control stopped any violence that involved a firearm, you wouldn't see so much violence with firearms in the places like Chicago and in Los Angeles, where they have some of the strictest gun control. So the evidence belies their legislative argument, but we're used to Democrats taking every shooting as an opportunity to pursue gun control. What's new about Buffalo is that now they're lashing their desire to have control over information, because they have their Ministry of Truth set up, right, and they now want to say that anyone who's committed a thought crime is somehow a threat to national security and the like. And so I think that what's interesting about the evolution of the left's tactics is they've gone from just seeking, control over firearms to now control over information as well. And I think it's really troubling when you give a government that much power. Obviously, this shooting was tragic and horrid, and the inspiration behind it is pure evil, and we reject it categorically. But that is not a license to have people in Washington, D.C. trying to have more of a say in what information you're allowed to be exposed to, because that's very quickly going to move into mainstream political discourse and thought if it presents a challenge to the narrative of the regime.
Yeah, my final question on this whole thing would be, what do you make of, because I, of course, have a strong opinion of this, of how the media immediately jumped out and started portraying this as a MAGA issue, white supremacist, blaming it on Trump supporters and Trump-like candidates or people in office. I'm pretty sure, I don't know if they brought up your name or Marjorie Taylor, but this is what the left does now. They're trying to say this young man was pushed into these extreme thoughts in his head because of the America First and the MAGA movement and the Trump people. I'm sorry, but why don't people ever want to discuss mental illness? This kid had a problem. He made threats on his school. Cops were called. FBI was notified. How did it fall through the cracks? I got a lot of other finger pointing we could do here about how this kid got to where it came over the weekend. But no, let's just blame Trump supporters. Come on.
Well, we'll learn a lot about the prior encounters that law enforcement had with this particular individual. Let's remember that in the Parkland tragic shooting in my home state of Florida, you had a shooter who had a neighbor call into the FBI and warn the FBI that this person was preparing for a school shooting. And so there are many circumstances where if you had a real effective deployment of law enforcement assets on the front end, we wouldn't have body bags and funerals tragically on the back end as we had in Florida and as we have in this case. But of course, no one act of violence is a license to smear an entire political movement of tens of millions of people. And I would suggest that Republicans were a lot more cautious when a Rachel Maddow watching Bernie Sanders supporter open fire on the congressional baseball practice with the intent of killing Republicans. We weren't out there saying that Bernie Sanders is at fault or Rachel Maddow's at fault. We were, I think, a little more tailored in our response to that. And yet they'll use any opportunity to take an extreme, awful, totally unacceptable and totally just reprehensible act and try to use that as a basis to take away guns, control information, concentrate and seize political power, and then smear their political opponents. And I think by now the American people are sort of used to that rhythm and routine. We just have to make sure that Joe Biden doesn't use this as a way to extend what's really troubling behavior out of the executive branch right now. We're seeing reports that Biden's told his team, go into campaign mode, go into the making promises business, because they see that Joe Biden has a historically bad approval rating at this time in his presidency. And so I think they could be a very dangerous administration with the tools they're trying to develop and deploy against the American people.
Well, and let's talk about power and control and where all of our money keeps going. I don't know if you heard me. I think we're up to $60 billion. You would know better than I. That's if the 40 gets approved. Thank goodness for Rand Paul putting a stop to it for now. I don't know what's going to happen if they push this through. But there are certain Republicans to blame, along with the Democrats, for this. Again, I'm calling it a slush fund, because I just saw a report over the weekend that said they're selling guns and some of our equipment on social media apps within Ukraine. People literally have gotten their hands on our gas masks, our guns, weapons, other things, and Ukrainians are selling them on social media and online. Because, again, we haven't tracked the aid we've been sending. But let's send $40 billion more, Matt.
Well, that money's going, despite Senator Rand Paul's good efforts. There are the votes in the United States Senate to send this money off to Ukraine and to send these arms, and there has not been a sufficient amount of audit and control and reconciling of what we've already sent to Ukraine. I'm concerned that more and more of that is ending up in the hands of the Azov Battalion, a group whose founding is actually expressly rooted in white supremacy.
Yes.
So very interesting that, while Democrats are doing everything they can to talk about white supremacy here at home, they're certainly not concerned by the Azov Battalion's roots in white supremacy as they send our weapons and our arms to a place where there's limited accountability. I think it'll be close to about $56 billion. And you know what we say here in Washington, Dan, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Eventually it adds up to real money. Just to put that in context, the Biden administration's budget for Customs and Border Patrol, $15.3 billion. So you're saying that Ukraine is more than 3 times more important than the homeland by approving this appropriation. That's why I was proud to be one of 57 Republicans in the House to vote against it. But unfortunately, we're not seeing that same level of resistance from Republicans in the Senate.
Final question to you, because I know you wanted to touch on it, and we're all waiting on pins and needles to see what happens. Title 42, you were just talking about the border and immigration budget, how we're spending a fraction of the amount there, but dumping it all in Ukraine right now. We know there's a crisis at the border. I heard, and I think this report's accurate, you can confirm for me, Matt, later this week, will that judge come out and we'll have that final ruling on whether or not Biden can allow 42 to expire? Because if the judge rules one way, he can't. It'll stay in effect for I don't know how much longer. What are you hearing on all that old Title 42 front?
A decision late this week, early next week could change what's happening. But what I'm telling you right now, Dan, is that Title 42 is functionally gone already at the border. Right. My colleagues who've been to the reporter have reported back to me that down there, they want to get ahead of the expected flow and flood and tidal wave. And so they're just waving these folks in, and groups that used to be encountered maybe, a dozen or so at a time now are well over 100. These are massive groups of people coming into the country. They're being dispersed throughout the interior of America, and it is on purpose. So don't you forget that Ali Mayorkas sat before our committee and said he had operational control of the border. Yeah. You're about to see that tested. That was a total lie. And what we have at the border right now is nothing but a turnstile. We have no border.
No.
And it's on purpose. And they had the tools from the Trump administration to solve this problem. And they're just allowing it to atrophy. And it's horrendous.
18,000 a day, folks, is what we will see very, very shortly. We're talking within a few weeks. Those surges are coming. And Biden's going to do nothing about it. So, well, I better not say this. I might get in trouble. Matt, I don't know. You tell me if I say we should stop paying our federal taxes until you guys actually spend our money the right way. Will that get me in trouble? Anyway.
It'll probably get you in trouble with the IRS more so than it will me.
I know. I'll keep paying mine. I'm a law-abiding citizen, unlike a lot of other scum out there. Matt Gaetz, Florida Congressman, thank you so much, as always, for coming on the program. Take care, brother.
Thank you, Dan.